Chapter 10. Upon the Path Where All is Good. At the present time, the statement that all is good is heard frequently, and as it seems to be a contradiction of human experience, it has naturally led to many arguments and much research into metaphysics, as well as the fundamental cause of things. There is, however, a large number that is convinced that in some form or manner all is in reality good, but the majority still cling to the idea that much is evil and wrong. When we consider the subject from the standpoint of what we may call eternal reality, defining the term reality as consisting of that something from which everything proceeds, it is not difficult to prove that all is good in its original state. In other words, that all that is real is good, just as we might say that all substance is good, and that all law is good. We know that no law has evil intentions fundamentally, and we realize that every law has possibilities for good, in one or many directions, although the results from the use of any law will depend upon whether the original purpose of the law was applied, or whether there was a misuse of the original purpose. We know that the same is true with regard to principle, and with regard to all the elements and forces in nature. They are all good in themselves, and we must naturally conclude that all things, wherever they exist, must necessarily be good in themselves. We realize, therefore, that when we deal with reality or the fundamental side of things, we find that all is good. However, when we deal with the whole of life, or life as it appears in its various forms of expression, the question is if we can say, is this broad and general manner that all is good? To answer this question, we shall have to ask ourselves what we are living for, or what we are here for, and we need not go very deeply into the analysis of that phase of subject before we convince ourselves that we are here to learn some most important lesson. We are here to acquire certain qualities, certain attainments, and to develop towards a certain supreme goal, and we soon find in viewing the subject in this manner that we shall, in order to fulfill our purpose in this life, find it necessary to follow a certain path, that is, the one path that naturally leads to the goal we have in view. This path we may speak of as a straight and narrow path, and although it is not narrow in the sense that it restricts us to an extent where we do not have privilege outside of a certain system of life or thought, still it does restrict us from the enjoyment of those things that are not conducive to the great purpose we all have in view. Here we must remember that the enjoyment of life is a part of the great purpose of life, and therefore the great pathway must necessarily provide not only for enjoyment, but for the highest form of enjoyment, and at every step of the way. When we learn this, we find the principal reason why we have not had more happiness in the past is because we have been drilled so long to believe that the moment we were becoming happy, we were on the wrong path. We were of the opinion that happiness and pleasure lead to destruction, but the new doctrine declares that you cannot be good unless you are living in the highest form of happiness that you can appreciate at the time. The contrary of the old doctrine declares that if you are not happy, you are not good. That is, if you are not thoroughly enjoying life, you are not living upon the great pathway of life. Knowing this, we realize that if we are unhappy, there is something about our living that is contrary to the great law of the ever-ascending life, or we may be practically off the path, so that the remedy would be to seek the great path once more, and we shall find, after we have entered into the realization of this new life, that it will be much easier to gain that fullness of happiness and joy that we all desire so much. We may begin our analysis of this subject, therefore, by making the statement that we are here to learn a great lesson, a lesson that is so large and so wonderful that the objective mind cannot possibly comprehend it under any circumstance. But as we develop the higher form of understanding, we realize more and more the fullness of its meaning. And we also realize that this lesson can be learned or worked out only as we follow the great path. To proceed further, therefore, in our study, we must understand the meaning of the great path. And we find that it is not some restricted mode of living, but a mode of living that we enter into when our whole attention is directed upon the great light of supreme wisdom. In other words, we are on the path when the whole of life has been consecrated to the best, to the highest, to the truest, to the richest, and to the ideal, including the best that can be found everywhere on all planes of life. Briefly stated, we are on the path when we are inspired with the great and wonderful purpose. But do we always follow this path? We find that we step outside frequently. We turn to the right and to the left almost every day, and in fact almost every hour. And when we do step outside, we experience pain, adversity, sickness, want, and all those conditions that we have spoken of as evil. Now the question is, if those things really are evil, we have thought of them as such, but we must analyze further before we find the real truth upon this important subject. We all know through experience that whenever we step outside the path we have pain, and we also know that this pain reminds us of the fact that we are off the path. Is this pain therefore an evil? It cannot possibly be an evil if it reminds us of our duty to our highest light. On the contrary, it is a good friend, and the moment we take the advice of this good friend and return to the path, there will be no more pain. From this brief analysis, we must conclude that pain is good. That is, it acts as a friend under every circumstance to encourage us to return to the path. We shall find that the same is true of all these other conditions that we call evil. They are reminders, some existing on the left side of the path, others on the right side of the path. And whenever we step outside, then these reminders inform us that we are off the path. Therefore, we must think of them as good, for indeed they are very good. If it were not for those reminders, we would possibly remain outside of the path for ages, and thus be deprived for all that time of the wonderful realization that are in store for us as we advance in the scale of eternal ascension. The truth is that all of these reminders, or so-called evils, are good, and we shall need them just so long as we continue to step outside the path. They are necessities for the time being, but the very moment we decide that we will never step outside of the path again, we shall never know these reminders any more. We meet them only when we step outside, and they are there to tell us to return. Therefore they are good. We all have had periods of experience proving the fact that when we continued on the path for some length of time, we realized that we were not, during that time, in touch with adversity, sickness, or pain on any side. We knew nothing about those things in our own experience. The reason was we were on the path, and those conditions do not exist on the path. But when something happened that caused us to step outside the path once more, we met pain, adversity, and other reminders, informing us instantly that we had stepped aside from the true way of existence. The question then will naturally be why we step off the path, and the answer is that we are learning our lesson, and a mind that is learning is not complete in its knowledge. Such a mind may form misconceptions now and then, and may secure impressions that are not in harmony with what we speak of as absolute truth. In other words, those impressions or ideas are fragments of what is really true, and such ideas may cause the mind to turn occasionally from the path of the absolute true. We understand this perfectly, and even though we shall not be able for a long time to see the whole truth upon any subject, still we know that no matter how many imperfect impressions we may form in the future about life, law, or existence, we know the very moment we step outside of the path, whether we do so through the suggestions of adverse impressions, imperfect impressions, or whatever the cause may be, we have a group of good friends on either side that will tell us to return to the path at once. Those good friends are pain, sorrow, trouble, adversity, and their companions. To act according to wisdom, therefore, we would take their advice in return, and henceforth so live that we shall never step outside the path again. We all know through experience that these so-called evils produce effects upon mind and body that are anything but pleasant. Then how can we think of these things as good? But here we remember that if those conditions produced a pleasant effect upon us, we would not return to the path. We would remain on the outside and never accomplish what we are created to accomplish. So therefore, the fact that these so-called evils are good friends, are painful in their effects, is also a positive good. It is quite necessary that their effects should be such. Otherwise, we would not accept their advice and return to the great work we have in store. In this connection, it is most important to consider the fact that if we would always look upon these conditions as good friends, instead of thinking about them as evils, thereby filling our minds with a mass of useless impressions, if we changed our attitude in this matter, we would find that several things would happen. In the first place, we would find that all the energy that we have been sending out to annihilate those good friends to no purpose, whatever could be used to build up soul, mind, character, and life on the great path. We all have experimented along this line, living for weeks and months in an attitude where we did not antagonize anything or anyone in any form whatever, and we discovered that, during such a period, we had more energy in life than ever before, and we accomplished far more than in the past. Besides, our work was better, and we enjoyed life to a far greater degree. In fact, we had more life to enjoy, because we were not wasting life trying to remove evil, or trying to remove those conditions that are absolutely necessary where they are, acting as eternal reminders to the human race, in order that no individual may remain on the outside of the path for any length of time. We know the value of the great law, resist not evil. And if we would never resist those so-called evils, never turn energy out to the right or to the left, where it could not be used for any purpose whatever, but on the contrary, use all our time, energy, and attention in building for a greater life, and in learning the great lesson, we would find the greatest difference in the world. We would find that where we took one step forward under the old mode of living, we would be able to take 10 or 20 under the new mode. We all know the effect of periods of grief and worry, how those conditions use up life and energy to no purpose. And the cause is simply this, that we are turning our energies out against conditions that cannot be removed, and therefore all such energy is wasted. Instead of trying to remove evil, we should let it alone and return to the great path. Evils do not exist upon the path, but they do exist outside the path, and it is absolutely necessary that they do exist there. No one, however, need turn to the left or to the right. Therefore, no one need meet evil if living be always on the path. We shall meet them, however, just as long as we make it a practice to turn to the left or to the right at frequent intervals. Accepting this idea, we will proceed to turn our energy where it can be used for some purpose, that is, in building for the great life that lies before us. And when we realize that every pain or adversity may have some good advice, some information that we need, we will, if we seek such information, gain decidedly. We will learn something of importance whenever we meet one of those good friends, and instead of antagonizing the so-called evil, we would ask what it all means and what good advice his friend has to give us at this particular time. Whenever we meet any condition that is not pleasing, we may know there is something for us to learn. We know that we have stepped outside the path, and we must investigate, so as to ascertain the reason why. We should meet these good friends, therefore, as monitors on the way, for that is what they really are, and if we look for information whenever we meet evil, instead of resisting and deploring our experience, we shall find what we are looking for and learn much. Under those circumstances, we should be scientists and proceed to investigate instead of being anxious or permitting grief and worry. We should look for the facts in the case, the lessons to be learned, for the law to be discovered, and in every instance these so-called evils will prove to be instructors, giving us valued and timely information along many lines. When we learn to look upon these conditions on the left or on the right as necessary advisors, knowing that we are here to continue on the path, training ourselves to see that in the ultimate or in the fundamental all things are good, the effect upon the mind will be wonderful. The moment we begin to live in the conviction that all things have a good purpose, whether we may see it now or not, we will find the mind becoming more wholesome, becoming stronger and more active, and that life will be elevated and enriched in many ways. We then enter into what has been called healthy mindedness, and we all appreciate the fact that such an attitude holds immense power for greater things. We shall also find the mind becoming more constructive, because instead of a large percentage of the elements and forces of the mind being turned aside, warring with outside conditions to no purpose, these energies will be used in building for the greater enrichment of existence. Thus the mind will be enlarged, consciousness expanded, and life becomes deeper, higher, more beautiful, and more perfect in every form and manner. We all know the value of filling the mind brimful of good thoughts. We know what a difference it makes. We know how much it adds both to joy and power, and there is no better way in which we can do this than to live in the conviction that all is good. And we shall not find it difficult to live in this conviction when we know that after all, the so-called evils of the world are good friends existing on the right and on the left of the path to remind us when we step aside, so that we may return at once. Another important gain is this, that if we realize that all is good, we will want to look for the real good and the greater good that must necessarily exist within all conditions, beyond all conditions, and above all conditions. If we train the mind in this manner, complying with the great law, he who seeks shall find, making it a practice to look for the greater good in everything and in everybody, we will find that consciousness will steadily expand, reaching out more and more, coming in contact with more desirable things, more things of value and worth than we ever were conscious of before. We understand that when the mind dwells continually in an attitude where attention is concentrated upon the imperfect, we are not coming in contact with greater worth nor meeting the superior in life anywhere. Such a mind may be satisfied in a certain sense for a brief time, but can gain nothing from life that will have in real or permanent value. And in every instance, the temporary satisfaction that was secured from contacting with the imperfect will give way to a state of mental and physical disease, due to the fact that such a mind will soon find itself outside of the path. It is the mind that touches the worthy, the superior, the higher, the finer and the richer on all sides that really gains happiness, and that really gains possession of the highest and the best that life can give. If we seek for the greater good in all places and in all modes of life, we will not simply find the good, but the greater good and the greater worth. And if there is one thing that we all need very much, it is this training of the mind to reach out for the greater, the worthier, the superior in all thought and action. We frequently ask ourselves what might be the greatest need upon this planet at the present time, and the answer is this: a larger number of superior men and women. We need more such men and women in order that they may become inspirations to the race. The entire world almost is now convinced of the truth that our destiny is upward and onward. The race can advance and must advance to be true to life, but the question is how we are to find those elements and methods through which continuous advancements may be realized. Here we should remember the statement, "When I am lifted up." It is the same with every individual. It was not simply true of Jesus Christ, although true of him to a larger degree than anyone else. We know through experience and observation that whenever any individual takes higher ground, that individual becomes an inspiration to scores, to hundreds or thousands. Therefore, we want more superior men in the world, men and women who have found the real worth of life, who have found the upper side, the real side, the true side, the superior side and the lofty side, that side of life that is teeming, we might say, with the rich, the beautiful, and the ideal. We want more such men and women to become inspirations of the race, and to that end we should give more attention to this wonderful law of seeing the greater good everywhere. However, we are not going to find this greater good if we give most of our time and attention trying to eliminate those conditions that exist on the path outside. If we think that those things are bad and try to remove them, we are wasting time. They are perfectly harmless where they are, and we need not go out where they are. It is not intended that we should go out where they are. It is intended that we should remain on the path where we shall never find pain, trouble, sorrow, sickness, or adversity in any form or manner. Henceforth, therefore, our object should be to let these harmless things on the outside alone, and instead of trying to remove them, we should give our time and attention to the training of the race to remain on the path that would solve the greatest problems of evil all over the world. In analyzing the subject further, we find that, although all things are good, fundamentally speaking, some things are better. That is, there are many things that contain possibilities for greater and greater good, but we cannot find the better or the greater anywhere unless we consecrate life absolutely to the purpose that all is really good, that all things can and do in themselves serve a great purpose. When we look at human society and note the so-called ills and troubles of certain modes of life, we may ask what we are to do about these things. We may also ask if it is necessary that people live in those adverse realms of society. In brief, if those people need such a life. But the answer to all these questions is very simple. The fact is that every individual is in contact with the path, and whatever he may be in the first step on the way or higher up in the scale, he will be absolutely free from pain, adversity, and ailments of all kinds the very moment he steps into the path. It is only necessary that we live on the path where we are, whether we are at the early stages of growth or upon the sublime heights. The fact that thousands and thousands of people are ignorant of this great truth should convince us of the importance of dealing scientifically with this great subject. We all are more or less responsible for every condition that exists in the world, and therefore we must all work together to the end that every individual may find the path, and also that every individual may be trained to continue uninterruptedly upon the path. But this will necessitate an absolute revolution of practically all the ideas that we have inherited from the past, and a large percentage of more recent ideas. However, the moment we understand that we are here to learn a great lesson, and that we can learn that lesson by remaining on the path, and also that we suffer pain and adversity only when we step off the path, we shall not find it difficult to solve the great problem before us. But this idea is not a recent revelation. The truth is that all the illumined souls of history have declared this very same thing. We cannot find a single exception. The wise men and women of all ages, including the prophets, all the scientists and their students of the higher life, whether they were in the first stages of wisdom or higher in the scale, they all declare that we are here to learn a great lesson. We are here to find the kingdom. We are here to rise in the scale. We are here to find and continue upon the great path. That is the message of every great soul that has ever lived, and the corresponding truth of this message, that is, that we suffer pain and adversity, Only when we are off the path, this has also been declared by every mind in history who saw the light. We should therefore once and for all time accept this great message as absolutely true, because we can prove it to be true. And we should eliminate from mind and thought every doctrine in the world that contradicts this message in any form or manner. If we could conceive of human society waking up to the realization of this great message, we can readily imagine the result. The great mass of humanity would at once return to the path, and suffering from pain, sickness, or adversity would speedily be reduced to a minimum. The great purpose of the future must be to convey this message to all the world, and to teach mankind how to find the path. We know full well that there is not an awakened soul upon earth who would want to remain on the outside of the path. Every awakened soul can see what lies on before, and such a soul will not care to step out even for a moment. There is nothing to be gained by turning to the left or to the right, even though such experiences may appear tempting at times. It is all loss and no gain, and the very moment we do step out, our good friends on the outside, evil, will declare at once, "You are off the path. Return this very moment." From whatever point of view we may consider the subject, we invariably come to the same conclusion, that is, that the purpose of life is good, as it leads to greater and greater good, to greater happiness, and to more and more of everything that can add to the worth of joy in existence. And although if we should, for the time being, in our study of life, gain imperfect impressions and sometimes step outside, or be tempted to investigate darkness, as learners are liable to do, we shall always find these good friends on the outside declaring, "This is no place for you. You belong on the great path. You are a son of God. You are destined for glory. Therefore return unto God." This is invariably the message of pain and of all the so-called evils of the world, and we cannot speak of these things as evil when their one advice to every human soul is this, "Return ye unto God." But again, we shall not need the advice of those good friends on the outside after we have received this great message, that the awakened of every age have received, that is, that we all belong in the path, and that we meet sin, pain, and adversity only when we step outside the path. Knowing this great truth, we shall want to give our whole time and attention henceforth to a better understanding of how we may so live that we shall always continue on the path. But as we proceed, we must not come to the conclusion that this path is so narrow that we are necessarily restricted from the majority of those things that we meet in life upon this planet. The fact is that we can enjoy everything in life as we proceed upon the path, provided we are true to the purpose of life. That is, provided our one purpose is, through all life and through all enjoyment, to reach out for the higher, the better, the truer, the richer, the more wonderful, the ideal, the sublime. We are entitled to all the pleasures of physical, mental, and spiritual existence, and we can enjoy them all and remain upon the path. But the spirit of all such enjoyment in all modes of life must invariably be upward and onward. And when life is inspired through and through with a desire for the highest and the best on all planes, we shall find that every atom in our being will work steadily and surely for the true, the perfect, the wholesome, the beautiful, and the ideal. The result will be that the upward current of life will become so strong that we will invariably be drawn upward and onward by an irresistible force, and thus the inclination to turn to the left or to the right will disappear completely. When the desire of life for the higher becomes so strong that the whole of life is inspired by that desire, there will no longer be any desire in mind or body to step outside the path. The one desire will be to live on the path, and that desire will be supreme. It is possible, therefore, through the development of that powerful spiritual desire, to place the human system in a position where it will be protected from temptations on all sides, and then regardless of what may come or transpire, we shall always continue on the path, always ascending towards the greater path, the greater glory, the greater light, and the greater joy. End of chapter.